There are 17 old silverware pieces that deserve a second look before you leave them sitting in a drawer. Some are worth only a few $100s, but others have sold for thousands because of one small detail: a maker's mark, an unusual pattern, an early date, a rare form, or a documented history. And that is the important distinction. An old spoon is not automatically valuable. A silver-plated fork is not automatically worthless. What matters is exactly what you have. A tiny mark underneath a handle can separate an ordinary piece from something made by a famous silversmith. An unusual serving spoon can turn out to be a rare 19th century form, and a complete group of early silverware can be worth considerably more than its weight in silver. So before you polish anything, separate anything, or send anything to the scrap dealer, look carefully. Number 17. Unusual antique serving spoons. Serving pieces are often overlooked because they do not look like the ordinary knives and forks people recognize as silverware. But unusual forms can attract collectors precisely because they were produced in much smaller numbers. A good example is a silver mechanical mining souvenir spoon from around 1900. Heritage Auctions sold one in 2004 for $360. It was shaped like a shovel with a mining-themed handle and a novelty scene incorporated into the bowl. It was not valuable simply because it was silver. Its unusual design and subject matter made it collectible. Your first test is simple. Look for silver marks on the back of the handle, then examine the entire object rather than just the bowl. Look for unusual shapes, miniature mechanisms, historical subjects, advertising connections, commemorative designs, or forms that you would not normally expect to see in a dining set. Do not throw unusual serving pieces into the same box as ordinary cutlery. The strange-looking piece may be the interesting one. Number 16. Early silver teaspoons. Small spoons are easy to overlook. They are also exactly the sort of object that can survive for generations because nobody considered them important enough to throw away. A 17th century silver spoon sold at Bonham's in 2015 for $2,500, including premium. The spoon was of tree-fid form, with geometric and foliate decoration and engraved initials. That tells you something important about antique silver. Age matters, but age alone is not enough. The maker, date, form, decoration, marks, and condition all have to work together. Turn an old spoon over. Look around the back of the handle and near the bowl for tiny stamped marks. Do not rub them aggressively. On a very old piece, those marks may be worn, and removing more surface material will not improve your chances of identifying it. And don't assume that a spoon that looks too small to matter is insignificant. Some of the most interesting early silver pieces are surprisingly modest in size. Number 15. Antique silver with an identifiable maker. The name underneath the handle can completely change the conversation. One example is a pair of silver tablespoons made by William Moulton III in Newburyport, Massachusetts in 1792. Bonham Skinner sold the pair in 2023 for $280.50 including premium. That particular result also demonstrates why you should never assume that every antique maker's mark means thousands. The correct question is not, is this old? It is, who made it, when did they make it, and how scarce is this exact object? Some makers have enormous collector followings. Others produced large quantities of silver that remain relatively affordable. So photograph the mark, record the shape and dimensions, and compare the exact maker and form with completed auction results. Do not rely on a listing where somebody has simply written "rare antique silver" in the title. Number 14. Old sterling silver flatware services. Now look at the pieces that are still together. A complete service can tell a much more interesting story than a random handful of spoons. Heritage Auctions sold a 41-piece Dominic and half sterling silver flatware service in 2014 for about $500. The service dated to around 1900, weighed more than 65 troy ounces, and carried the provenance of Juliette Pierpont Morgan before passing through the family. This is why you should never divide an inherited service simply because you think the individual pieces are easier to sell. Keep the knives, forks, spoons, and serving pieces together. Look for matching marks, matching decoration, the original pattern, and any case or documentation that came with the service. And remember that weight is only part of the story. If you sell antique silver purely for its melt value, you may be throwing away the very characteristics that collectors are willing to pay for. Number 13. Tiffany silver that looks ordinary. The word Tiffany attracts attention, but even here you have to be careful. Heritage sold a Tiffany & Co. sterling silver spoon from around 1900 and 2007 for $119.50. It was a Jack and Jill pattern spoon with a monogram. That is a useful warning. A famous name does not automatically mean a huge price, but unusual Tiffany pieces can be very different. Heritage sold a Tiffany American Indian pattern serving spoon, designed in 1884, for $4,250 in 2024. It carried Tiffany's sterling and patent markings and featured an elaborate high-relief design. So if you find Tiffany silver, don't stop at the name. Identify the exact pattern. Look for the maker's marks, pattern characteristics, patent information, and any unusual decoration. The difference between an ordinary Tiffany spoon and an unusual historical design can be enormous. Number 12. Rare Tiffany pattern pieces. One particularly interesting example is a Tiffany American Indian pattern spoon, sold by Heritage in 2004 for $5,040. It was made around 1885 and featured a highly distinctive handle depicting a dancing Native American figure. This is the sort of silverware that can look more like a miniature sculpture than something intended for a dining table. Your test here is the design. Don't simply search old Tiffany spoon. Photograph the handle, the bowl, the marks, and the decoration. Then, try to identify the exact pattern. And don't polish away the details before you've done that. Relief decoration, engraving, and surface characteristics can all help establish what you have. Number 11. Early American coin silver. This is where many people make a mistake. They see the words coin silver and assume it must be worth a fortune because it sounds older than sterling. But coin silver simply refers to an earlier American silver standard, and individual pieces can vary dramatically in value. Heritage sold a Jabez Halsey coin silver spoon from New York, made around 1800 for $134 in 2021. It was marked I. Halsey and came from the Eric P. Newman Numismatic Education Society. The lesson is simple. Do not value an old spoon by its age or silver content alone. Identify the silversmith. A relatively obscure maker may produce a modest result, while an important colonial silversmith can move the price into completely different territory. Number 10. 16th and 17th century apostle spoons. Now we are getting into genuinely early silver. Bonham sold an Edward VI silver apostle spoon made by Nicholas Bartholomew in London in 1547 for $4,000 including premium. The spoon had a fig-shaped bowl and a religious figure at the end of the stem. Another early 17th century East Anglian apostle spoon, tentatively attributed to Francis Cobb and dated around 1610, sold at Bonham's for $1,292.50 including premium. These pieces demonstrate why hallmarks matter so much. A tiny date letter, town mark, or maker's mark can help establish where and when a piece was made. Do not scrape those marks. Do not use abrasive cleaners. And if you believe you have something from the 16th or 17th century, stop handling it unnecessarily and have it examined by someone who specializes in early silver. Number 9. Silver with historical provenance. Sometimes the story behind the silver matters almost as much as the object itself. A spoon can be damaged and still be interesting if its history is extraordinary. Heritage sold a damaged silver spoon in a fitted case in 2008 for $776.75. It dated to 1799 and carried inscriptions connected with European royal family history. Notice what happened here. The spoon was damaged. It was not pristine, but its inscriptions, age, case, and documented historical associations made it something more than scrap silver. So if an old spoon has an inscription, don't immediately assume somebody ruined it by engraving their initials. Read it. Photograph it. Look for dates, names, places, and historical references. An engraving can sometimes reduce value, but a genuine historical inscription can do exactly the opposite. Number 8. Complete antique silverware with provenance. This is where family history becomes important. Imagine finding an old silver service in a cabinet and discovering that the family kept photographs, receipts, or correspondence with it. That paperwork can be extremely useful. The Dominic and Half service mentioned earlier had documented provenance connected with Juliette Pierpont Morgan. That history was part of the object's identity. Your test is to search the box, not just the drawer. Look for old receipts, auction catalogs, handwritten notes, estate documents, and photographs. Do not throw away a yellowed piece of paper because it looks worthless. It may establish where the silver came from. And never invent a family story around an object simply because it sounds impressive. A documented connection is much stronger than something someone vaguely remembers hearing. Number 7. Rare antique silver spoons with unusual forms. Collectors often pay more for something that was made for a specific purpose rather than mass-produced as ordinary tableware. Think sugar tongs, toddy ladles, marrow spoons, mote spoons, caddy spoons, sauce ladles, and other specialized utensils. These objects were produced in smaller numbers, and some disappeared from ordinary use long ago. The test is the shape. If you find a strange silver utensil and cannot immediately explain what it was used for, don't discard it. Measure it, photograph it, check the marks. Its unusual form may be precisely why a specialist wants to see it. Number 6. Silver, made by Paul Revere Jr. Now we reach a completely different level. Paul Revere Jr. was not merely a historical figure, he was also a silversmith, and his marked silver can commands serious prices. Heritage sold a Paul Revere Jr. silver tablespoon from Boston circa 1780 for $11,875 in 2021. The spoon was marked Revere and had documented provenance, and 6 Paul Revere Jr. tablespoons from around 1790 sold in the same auction for $40,000. This is why the maker's mark deserves your attention. If an old spoon has a clear name underneath the handle, don't assume it's merely a manufacturer's brand. It could be the signature of the person who made it, but authenticate it before getting excited. Old silver marks can be difficult to read, and reproductions exist. Number 5. A single Paul Revere spoon. The remarkable thing about the Paul Revere examples is that you don't necessarily need an enormous silver service. One spoon can be significant. A Paul Revere Jr. tablespoon from around 1790 sold for $32,500 at Heritage in 2021. It carried the Revere mark, documented provenance, and a monogram connected to Hepzibah Hall Fitch. Think about what that means. It was a spoon, not a chest, not a palace, not a room full of silver, a single spoon. But the combination of maker, age, rarity, historical context, and provenance made it something collectors were willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for. That is the central lesson of this entire list. Never judge value by size. Number 4. Rare presentation and historical silver. When you encounter silver with a fitted case, unusual inscriptions, presentation markings, or an important historical connection, stop. Those details can turn a functional household object into a historical document. Look carefully at the case. Look underneath. Look for names, dates, inscriptions, and marks. Don't throw the box away. Don't separate the spoon from its original case. And don't assume a damaged piece is automatically worthless. In antique silver, historical significance can sometimes outweigh cosmetic perfection. Number 3. Early American silver by a documented master. At this level, the silver content is almost beside the point. Collectors are buying history. Paul Revere's marked silver demonstrates this perfectly. 6 tablespoons weighing only a little over 11 troy ounces together achieved $40,000 at auction. The buyer was not paying simply for the metal. They were paying for objects made by a historically important American silversmith and preserved with enough information to establish their identity. So if you inherit American silver from the 18th or early 19th century, do not rush to sell it for melt value. The hallmark may be worth more than the silver itself. Number 2. Fabergé silver. Now we leave ordinary flatware behind. Heritage sold a Fabergé gilt silver spoon with an imperial warrant from Moscow, dated 1892, for $3,000 in May 2026. The spoon had documented provenance through Sotheby's and an inventory number. Fabergé is an excellent example of why maker, historical importance, and provenance can matter more than the amount of silver in an object. If you find a piece marked Fabergé, don't clean it, don't polish it, and certainly don't assume that a familiar-looking spoon is just another piece of antique silver. Document every mark, photograph the object from every side, keep any box, receipt, or paperwork, and have the attribution independently checked. Number 1, the silverware piece that proves why you should check the drawer twice. The most valuable discoveries are not always the largest. Sometimes the entire story is hidden underneath the handle. That is why the first thing I would do with an old piece of silverware is turn it over. Look for the maker, look for the purity mark, look for the date, look for the assay office, look for unusual symbols. Then identify the exact object before you make any decision about cleaning or selling it. The strongest examples on this list share the same characteristics. They are not merely old, they are identifiable. They have something specific that collectors want. A famous maker, an early date, a rare pattern, an unusual form, exceptional provenance, original condition, or some combination of all of them. And that is the mistake people make when they empty an old drawer. They see tarnish and think scrap. They see a monogram and think damaged. They see a tiny spoon and think insignificant. They see a strange fork and think useless. But collectors see evidence, so take your silverware out carefully, keep matching pieces together, photograph the front and back, photograph every mark, write down the dimensions, record where the piece came from, keep the original boxes and cases, then compare your exact piece with completed auction results rather than optimistic online asking prices. And most importantly, don't polish first and research later. You can always decide how to clean an object after you understand what it is. You cannot always undo aggressive cleaning, repair, engraving removal, or a trip to the scrap dealer. The next time you open that old drawer, look at the silverware differently. The question isn't simply, is this silver? The better question is, exactly what is this? Who made it? When was it made? And why did someone keep it for all these years? Because sometimes the most valuable thing in the drawer is the piece nobody thought was worth looking at.